All right, so my name is Kyle Oliver, Principal Product Manager for BigIQ, and today we're going to take you through some enabling self-service for app owners with BigIP Cloud Edition or BigIQ 6.0 in general. This, unlike probably many of the presentations that you have gone to this week, I am going to be tempting fate, and this is my single slide for this presentation, and I'm going to attempt to do the rest as live demo. So if the network gods, the cloud gods all shine brightly on me, we should be able to get through this and potentially even have time at the end for you to ask questions about things that aren't on this list. So how many folks in the room have BigIQ? Okay. And how many folks in the room either have seen or already have BigIQ 6.0 or 6.01? All right. So what I'm going to show you today is 6.01. It was released 1 week ago today. There isn't that much of a difference between the 6.0.0 release and the 6.0.1 release. The main difference is 6.0.1, or let me say this a different way. 6.0.0 was a greenfield only release, as we called it, so there was no upgrade path to get to 6.0.0. 6.0.1 is the upgradable release of the functionality that is in 6.0.0. We did that for sort of time to market, ability to get the 6.0.0 stuff out there and give people time to play with it, and then in the background, we were doing the testing and validation around upgrade to 6.0.1. There are a few feature differences between 6.0.0 and 6.0.1, and I'll try to point them out today in this session. But in case I forget, I think the main difference as far as features and functionality go is you can tie an APM policy into the service catalog in 6.0.1, and that wasn't available in 6.0.0. 6.0.0 supported ASM policy and AFM policy as well as logging information, but it did not support APM. All right, so the first thing that I'm not showing is the demo. It looks great for me. What do you? Let's see if this screws up the resolution. Well, not so bad. All right. So the first thing that I want to point out is kind of the two different views, the application owner view and sort of the admin level view for BigIQ. So one of our goals with enabling self-service for the app owner is we want to make that view as simple as possible. We understand that the application owners are not necessarily F5 experts or domain experts in the F5 technology, so presenting them with large menus full of information like over here, where I've got the object by object view of things, and I can drill down on all of the different pieces and parts for the components in the BigIP configuration can be somewhat daunting to them or confusing. So if I flip over to this other tab here and actually go back, you can see, I'll point out a few of the differences here. Let me Control+ this for a few minutes. So in this view over here is the admin. I've got these tabs across the top where I can navigate to different areas of BigIQ, and I've got that left-hand menu that I was navigating there earlier. In the application owner view, no tabs, no left-hand menu, just the information about the applications that this application owner has either deployed themselves or an admin or somebody else has deployed and granted them access to. And that access can either be a read-write type access where they can make changes to their own applications, or if you're not quite ready to even turn over those keys to the kingdom, you can give them a read-only access to their application so they can view things like the stats and analytics that we'll go through here in a minute for their own application and only see the pieces and parts that pertain to them. Now, I can drill down on an application itself, and I'm probably gonna have to back up here so that I can fit this all on the screen. And what I can see as an application owner, I can see this as the admin as well, the bar across the top here has information specific to this application itself. So all of the information that you see here when I've drilled down is pertains to this application. So I have information about the response time, the average connections, the average HTTP transactions. Is it protected? And that little shield up here where it's blue and says it's protected, that means that this application is protected with an ASM, a WAF policy. You see information about whether the policy is in transparent mode, what percentage of bad traffic, and what sort of findings there may be for this application. So things like if this application was under attack, this findings would say something like successful attack. And you would see that indicated there. In this next panel at the top, you've got an alert history that tells you what alerts have been raised for this application itself. So here, I think I'll be doing a lot of this zooming in and out. So you can see things like the server-side response time for a server exceeded 20 milliseconds, and it tells you when that alert was raised, and if the alert was dropped, and information about different alerts that have been raised. If I want to see the entire alert history for this application, I can click on that see all, and I can see a history of all of the alerts for this application and when it crossed certain thresholds. And then if there are, I have scroll bar challenges. If there are active alerts going on, they get their own panel over here that tells you exactly what are those alerts that are currently active. So it gives you kind of that quick troubleshooting view of what's going on for this application. I can also, over here, click on this health indicator and set these thresholds or metric conditions on a per application basis. So for this particular application, I can set, do I want to monitor this thing? So you can see there's a row of checkboxes here on the left. And if I do want to monitor that particular metric, when do I want to say that this application has crossed to the warning threshold? So for example, in this case, I say if the server-side response time has exceeded 20 milliseconds, turn this application amber or yellow, depending on what part of the world you're from. If the round trip time crosses 100 milliseconds, turn it to red and say it's reached the critical threshold. So back on this view, that's what changes this health icon here, and also what changes the color of this banner here and the health icon here as well. So let me go back down in there and talk about a few other things. So we've also got the ability to track events on an application by application basis. So things like pool member up, pool member down, virtual server up, virtual server down. And on an application by application basis, you can choose how do you want to get notified about both the crossing of these thresholds and these events. You can send SNMP traps, and you can also send emails. And you can put a application-specific list of email addresses in here, so the application owners themselves can get notified when things are happening for their particular application. So the next piece that I want to talk about here is this kind of application abstraction layer here in the middle. So what this is a kind of a high-level end-to-end representation of the application itself, starting at the client side over here, and then working all our way back to the server side. And you may not be able to see it in the back there, so I'll zoom in again. But we have some information about the latency between the client and the big IP environment here, and it shows you a little sparkline chart of kind of how that's changed over time. And similarly, between the big IP environment and the back-end servers, we have the same information here. So again, that's another sort of quick indicator, quick tool that if somebody's experiencing problems with an application, you can drill down here and if you see that this indicator here for latency between the big IP and the back-end servers, is a hockey stick going up to the right, then you kind of gives you an idea of where do you want to start looking to see where the problem might lie. One of the things that we're trying to make it easier for you guys as the F5 admins is mean time to innocence or mean time to not the F5. So giving you these views to help point you in the direction of where the problem might be, and even potentially have the application owner be able to go in and see things like, oh, hey look, the latency between the big IP and the backend servers has spiked. Maybe I won't wake the F5 guy yet. It's a dream maybe, but we can have goals. So again, gonna zoom back out here. If the other thing that this abstraction layer provides me is an ability to, you can see as I move my mouse here, I've got places where I can click and get different information or different analytics. And based on resolution challenges, I'm gonna collapse a few of these things here. So when I click on the different areas, so right now I clicked on the client side, I get different analytics down here at the bottom to give me information about what's going on for this application as far as the client side goes. So over here on the left-hand side, I have some selection of metrics that I can choose. What do I want to drill down on? So I've got transactions, client-side RTT, page load time, and end-to-end time for the application. And then in this section here, this is where I've got the view of the analytics over time. And speaking of time, I can set how far back do I want to look for this particular metric or this particular application. So I can zoom that out as far as I basically have stored data for. And all of this data is stored out on the BigIQ data collection devices. So depending on the number of data collection devices you have and the amount of storage you have there, basically sets how far back you can look for this information. Let's play around with a couple different things here. So let's say I wanted to take a look at this maybe interesting spike here and get more information about that. I can just select that spike here on the graph, and it will zoom in to that particular point in time. And then I've got these events you can see down here on the bottom. So I've got different bubbles about different events that have happened over time. I can turn those on or off from the chart. And I can also click down on a particular event and get more information on, what is that event actually telling me? And then if I click on the line down here at the bottom, it gives me even more information to say, this application had crossed a threshold about the attack rate, and now the attack rate has gone back to a stable state. And we have the ability to look at those events by category, and I can turn them on or off. So if I only wanted to look at the security events, for example, I can turn off the system events, and it will only give me the bubbles about security, and vice versa. And then I can also take a look at things by log level. So if I only wanted to see the critical events, I can, or I just turned off the critical events. So if I only wanted to see the critical ones, I can select just that critical one, and it's going to show me that only the critical events. Now, a couple other ways to interact with this chart. I've got the ability to move this slider around. So let's say somebody reports a trouble ticket that the problem happened at 6 in the morning. You can move this slider around and take a look at that point in time. And you can also, as you navigate through these different metrics, that time sort of holds true. So you can look at these different points in time. If you slide this bar back to the right-hand side, it's going to go back to a refresh mode where it's going to update. Question?
Does it have the ability to trigger like a service now ticket if it hits a certain threshold, kind of like those? I do a lot of stuff in the environment.
So right now our abilities to alert are SNMP traps and email. So I can set how frequently I want these charts to refresh. You can turn it off either by turning it off here or moving that slider bar off of the far right, or you can say refresh up to every 10 minutes. So the last thing I want to talk about on this page is even more metrics down the right-hand side that you can control what is displayed on the left-hand side for the graphs. So if I wanted to see information about a particular pool member, I can select just that particular pool member and get information about what's going on for just that pool member. I can also do cool things like select multiples of the same object type and create a custom comparison chart. This one is showing all three of my pool members on the same graph, and then I can choose what metric do I want to look at for that particular, for this comparison. Now, because this F5 is load balancing so well, these pool members are largely right on top of each other as far as the balancing. But if I zoom in here, you can see that there are some differences. Let's see if I choose something else here. There you go. So you can now see that the applications, excuse me, the differences between these pool members. So maybe you're getting a problem, or people are reporting poor response time, or we're reporting poor response time at this point in time, and you can see that it was the .141 pool member that was having the highest response time at that particular time. Then you can clear these filters, and take a look at other metrics within the environment. So maybe you want to see what pool members, or maybe people are complaining about getting 404s for the application. So I don't know if you could see it in the back there, but I'm able to choose, what response codes is the big IQ seeing for the application. And when I select just that response code, it updates my graph on the left to say, only show me information about that particular response code. So you can see in this case, it's this one pool member here, the .142, that is the one that is returning those 404s. The other devices aren't returning any 404 codes. If you wanted to look at the actual raw stats or the tabular data for this information instead of the graph or in addition to the graph, you can pull out this right-hand panel and get that information. You can also do things like click to sort on the different columns here, and if I right-click here, I can do things like add that comparison chart. I can add columns that aren't shown here. I can choose from here which particular metric do I want to sort by. All right, so do you see this as useful? Do you see this as something you would like to be able to give out to your application owners? Do you see this as something your application owners would be able to consume? Yeah, so what he said down here in the front was he sees this as a tool for the admins to be able to help troubleshoot the problems, not necessarily the application owners themselves. So I think the responses that I had here are largely the ones that I've had with virtually every customer that I've talked about or talked to, where customers have this dream or maybe a directive from up on high that says, thou shalt give the application owners all of these keys to the kingdom, if you will. And in practical purposes, I've only talked to a small handful of customers that are really ready to turn these keys to the kingdom over and say, oh yeah, absolutely, I'm going to let the application owner do what they want and create these applications out on my big IPs and do their own work here in the app-centric view. So I was doing all of that from the client perspective, but let me take a couple minutes here and go through the other different areas of that abstraction. So if I click on the environment, as you might imagine, I start to get information about the big IP that is hosting or big IPs that are hosting this particular application. So things like CPU utilization, memory utilization, cores, ASM memory, all of those things can be seen here from this dashboard. And we also, starting with the environment area, we have a configuration tab here where they can take a look and see information about the configuration of this particular big IP. Now, there's not much that they can do here on this screen. It shows them a very simple map of how things are configured. If it was a cluster, it would show a cluster of big IPs here. If it was what we call a service scaling group, which is something new we introduced in 6.0, where Big IQ can basically manage the auto scaling of the application environment in VMware or AWS. There would be a pictorial representation of that here on the right. And then if I click down here to traffic management, again, I've got the analytics and the configuration view. But I've got, so information on the left here, again, only providing them a small bit of information that they would be able to consume and not exposing all of what I like to call the million nerd knobs of the big IP out to them, but also giving them on the right-hand side this map of kind of how are things connected. So in this application or in this deployment, we've got a redirect virtual server and then a default virtual server, and then it's connected to a pool, and it's got these 3 pool members. And starting at the application services level, I've also got the notion of a quick edit here. So I can drill down and get more information here and potentially even change settings. So if I needed to update the IP address or the service port for this application, I can do that from here. Yeah, so all of this is RBAC controlled. From the application view right now, your controls are basically read-write or read-only. We don't yet have sort of the fine knobs within the application view to say, I want to give them read-write for certain things, but not other things. So you're either giving them all the keys for their application or a view for their application right now. Yep, so all of this is tracked by the audit logs that aren't exposed to the application owner, but the admin can go in and see who made what change, when, and.
One key thing though, like in this app owner view, through the application templates, you do have the control of like which things you expose. So you don't have to give them the ability to configure anything. You can let them monitor or just change the service port, and that's it. So you do have that granularity in the application template. Right.
So yeah, back to sort of the million nerd knobs discussion. You know that the configuration for a virtual server is much more than just the name, the destination IP, net mask, and service port. So all of those other nerd knobs, as I call them, are hidden from the application owner view, both at application deployment as well as here on this quick edit screen. And then if I drill down on different things like the HTTP monitor, so you can see here's a great example of for the HTTP monitor, there's really nothing for them to edit. All of that is locked down to whatever the corporate standard is. They can't go in and muck with that to say, my receive string is this now. You can expose that out to them if you want to, but in this case, it's not exposed to them. Then if I take a look at things like security, here's an example of where, and what this yellow bar says here in the middle is the security policies have been configured by your administrator. Contact your administrator to make changes to this policy. So in this environment, for this particular template, this group has decided to say our security admins are going to be the ones that manage all the changes to our ASM policy. And if anything needs to happen there, then the application owner needs to talk to the security team to have those changes made. So they can get information about what policies are applied, but they can't make any changes there. But over on the analytics side, they can still get information about what is it that's going on in that environment from a security standpoint. So they can see that here there was an increase in illegal transactions, and they can get information about exactly what sort of violations were being detected during this time period. So what sort of attacks was their application seeing? And again, on the right-hand side, you can drill down and slice and dice this information that is shown on the left-hand side for each of these graphs. Then if I expand this out again and select down to the server side, again, resolution challenges here, you can see that the analytics that are shown here are all things that have to do with the application server. So the server latency, the application response time, server-side response time, TPS, and any sort of information about response errors. And the same sort of slicing and dicing here on the right. One thing that I didn't show for the virtual servers, but I'll talk about here for the pool members is We talk to a lot of customers that just want to be able to do the enable, disable, force offline operations, or have their application owners be able to do that thing. So from the application view, they can do the enable, disable, force offline, and potentially even create and delete their application servers or pool members right from here, and take care of that on their own. And so if I do this disable, I can click here, and right now it's doing what we call immediate deployment. It's going out to that big IP and disabling that pool member out on that big IP. So like I said, self-service, they can do all that information, all that themselves. They can see that pool member is now disabled, and potentially do their work or upgrade or whatever they needed to do on that application server, and then they can come back in themselves, bring that back online, view how it is performing pre and post upgrade, and do some of that testing on their own.
Can you see timings for
So in this particular one, I cannot, because I don't have iRules configured there. But if I flip over to the admin view here, I can see information about my iRules and down to the type of events that are happening and what events are happening there. This is going to show me across all of the big IPs in the environment. This one happens to only be on one, but I can narrow this view just for that. Actually, I don't know this for sure, but I think if the iRule was part of the configuration template that displayed that application, I think you might get the iRule information in the app-centric view, but I don't know that for sure. You can certainly get it, as I show here, from the admin view, whether that's exposed out to the application owner in the app-centric view. I have to check. So let me talk a little bit about the ability for the application owner to create their own application services. And then we'll sort of work our way backward and show how the admin can create those templates and expose out a certain subset of those templates to the application owners. So you can see here, well, maybe you can't see in the back, but there are create and delete buttons here in the app-centric view. So other than drilling down on the applications themselves, that's really the only thing that the app owner can do. If they click create, they get this list of templates that are exposed out to them. So in this case, this particular application owner has been granted access to two templates that are our default templates for AWS. One that's HTTPS offload with WAF, and one that's just a regular HTTPS offload, and then one that is a default HTTPS WAF that's not particular to the AWS environment. So that if this application owner, I have to zoom back out here, chooses from their template, then they have this small number of fields to fill in as to what information do they need to provide to configure this application. So I'm going to flip back and forth between a couple screens here. I normally do this with multiple monitors, so I'm hiding this from view, but I don't have that luxury today. So I'm going to grab that information. Say this is site10.example.com. Then I choose which big IP or big IPs do I want to deploy this application to. And I've got these two at the top here that are noted as being part of a cluster. So if I choose either one of those, it's going to deploy those applications out to that clustered pair. And then I've got these two standalone devices down here at the bottom that I can deploy the application to. And the other piece that I've got here is this service scaling group. And this particular owner doesn't have access to any service scaling groups. That is that BigIQ managing the auto scale in VMware or AWS. So you can control, you can set up one of those environments and control which application owners have access to which service scaling groups. So I'm going to choose to deploy this out to one of my Seattle BigIPs. I've got a toggle here to say, do I want to collect HTTP statistics? In general, I would say you do want to check that box because that's what's going to give you all those rich statistics at the application layer we just talked about. And so here in the next section, this talks about the security policies that are applied here. But again, this is a case where the application owner doesn't have a choice of what are the policies. So this is using the ASM template default policy. And it's got a couple of shared security profiles around logging and things like that. So the next piece is configuring the application servers. And I've got the ability to either type in the IP addresses or I can load them from a CSV file here. And that CSV file is just as simple as IP address, comma, port. And you can fill that out and then they can put their information in here. Or if they wanted to do it manually, they can just click this plus button, type in their IP address and port here, or select the service if it's a known service here, and BigIQ will fill that information in. Then they put in, if I can do this, a couple more pieces of information about the destination address for this virtual server. So let me flip back here again and grab my VIP address so I don't typo. I put that in here, duplicate it down here. You can also leverage these. We can create an IP pool on the BigIQ to select IP addresses for the application owner and use that to deploy out. It's kind of our stepwise to getting to IPAM, so we are working towards integrating this with sort of IPAM systems. But right now we have the ability to either plug these IPs in here or create a pool of IPs for BigIQ to use to deploy this out. So before I go deploy this application, I want to show a couple of things here. In the upper right-hand corner, we've got this view sample API request. So for folks who want to not use a GUI, they want to automate and orchestrate this from some other system, that view sample API request button lights up as soon as I've filled in all of the required fields for this particular template. And this gives you the exact API call that you need to deploy this application as described by the template behind. So you can see here, I could grab this URL and this JSON body and change the parameters that I want to change the next time I deploy this application or deploy an application from this template. And I don't have to come to this GUI again, but I still get all of that same app-centric view and all of the fine-grained RBAC that we talked about earlier. It's just driven by an API here. And then if I click create here, and the demo gods are shining on me, this is going to go out to our BigIPs, or our BigIP in this case, and deploy this application. And I get a banner bar across the top here that tells me it's deploying those changes out. And when this completes, it will start bringing me back the analytics about this application. So while this is going on, let me jump back over to my admin view and talk about the a little bit more about the service catalog and a little bit more about the application templates. So you can see that the admin has the visibility to that applications being deployed and starting to see some information there as well. So zoom this in a little bit. This is the service catalog that's built into BigIQ, and starting in version 6.0, we started to deploy some, or we started to configure some default templates or ship with some default templates. And for those of you that are familiar with the App Services IAP, we took our lead from that IAP and took the use cases that customers were leveraging that IAP for and built very similar templates within BigIQ to address those same workflows. So you can see here things like FastL4 TCP, FastL4 UDP, and all the way up to, as I showed in that other screen, the ability to do a HTTPS offload with a WAF template. So these three here are three that are new in 6.01, and those are the ones that are about being able to attach APM policy to your application. These default ones are about offloading the auth for your app to APM, and you can configure doing that via Active Directory, LDAP, or Radius. And you can use these templates as shipped here from F5 or as described here by F5, and I can drill down and show you the components of them. So I've got the information of how this is configured, some basic properties of the template itself to say, give it a name, what a description, share addresses. This has to do with if you're using the IP pool and you have that redirect like I was filling out in the application deployment there. If you enable this, it's going to share that same IP address across the redirect and the default virtual server. We've got the ability to tie in scripts to application deployments. So after an application is deployed using a template, you can run a set of TMSH commands or bash commands. After you do an update to the application, you can run the same script or another script. And then prior to deleting an application, you can run yet a third script to maybe handle things that the BigIQ can't currently handle, or maybe are potentially even outside of the BigIP system. Those scripts can be TMSH or bash. And then you've got some information here about the services that are part of this template, and you can get more information on the right-hand side and drill down to get that view of how are these things configured within this template. In the right-hand column over here, you can check box. This one's a default template, so you can't change it, but we'll go through that in a minute. You can select which of these fields are editable, and by editable we mean at application deployment time, these are the things for this particular object that are going to be asked for. So this configuration screen for a virtual server is literally the same configuration screen that's under configuration at the object level for virtual servers, with the main exception to it is this editable column over on the right to say, is this going to be asked for at application time or application deployment time? And if the checkbox isn't checked for editable, that basically means that every time an application is deployed with this template, it's going to have the setting that's over here on the left-hand side. So you can enforce whatever your corporate standards are as part of these templates. Then if I click this preview button here, it's going to show me what is going to be asked for this particular application. In this case, it's only going to ask for a name at application deployment time. And then if I jump back here, I can go through all of the different object types, and I'll show a little bit more about the security piece. So this is new in 6.0. In 5.4, we introduced the start of this service catalog. 6.0, we added the security pieces, and 6.01, we added the specifics around access here at the bottom. So you can set what is my ASM policy for this application, what is my AFM policy, what DOS profiles are used, what logging profiles are used. So every time an application is deployed from this template, it will be set up with those things. So let's suspend disbelief and say that in your particular environment, these F5 default templates aren't exactly what you want. Would you believe it? So we've given you a baseline, and you can do a couple of different options to get these templates to more match your environment. So the first suggestion I would make would be take our default template, clone it, give it a name, and what it's going to do is it's going to copy all of those settings from our default template and make it so you can edit this template for yourself. So you can update now all of those things that were grayed out and I couldn't change in the default template, I can change here. So now I can select from the different scripts that are available on my box. I can drill into any of the object types here and change any of the particular, the demo gods.
You were so close.
Wah, wah. As I was saying, I can drill down on this object type and now go in here and change out to whatever fits my particular environment. This is where I can do things like select my IP pool to say select from a range of internal addresses as opposed to having the user put it in here. And you can see I can change any or all of these settings, or I can say I want this thing to be editable at application deployment time. And if I click the preview here, now it's giving me the information of the 4 fields that are asked for when I'm deploying from this type of application. Discard those changes and come back, and now again, similar to the what I had for the AFM, or sorry, what I had for the virtual server there, I can come in here and say maybe I want to select a different ASM policy to deploy with this particular application and make all of my security changes. Now, one of the things that I'll highlight here is a feature of BigIQ, not new to 6.0, but still interesting, especially when attaching an ASM policy to multiple applications. If those applications are using the same ASM policy, BigIQ offers a centralized learning for ASM. So rather than those ASM devices learning locally and having the ASM policy kind of updated locally on the boxes, they can send all of that learning centrally to the BigIQ. Then your security admins can log into the BigIQ and make the decision for, do I want to accept this suggestion? Do I want to deny this suggestion? And then deploy that policy update out to all of the ASMs that are running that policy. So that they don't have to kind of do that manual, oh, this box was seeing this kind of traffic, I'm going to accept that suggestion over here, but I need to remember to replicate that suggestion over to this other box. They can use BigIQ to do that for them. And actually in the 6.0 release, we added the ability for those security admins to kind of set it up to learn on its own and push that, automate the pushing of those suggestions, set the thresholds of when do I want to automatically accept those things, and what time of day do I want to push out those changes out to the big IPs. So not really specific to the app owner or app-centric view, but a little cameo there for our centralized learning. All right, so last thing that I'll show, or a couple of things that I'll show here about the service catalog. So let's suspend disbelief even further and say what you want for your template is so far away from our default that you want to start with something you've already got out there. Well, lucky for you, we've got that ability. So I can create a template. I'm going to name this one import template. And then I've got an option here. I got two options here. Create, if I click this, I really am creating this template on an object by object basis, similar to if I was creating it in the configuration screen. So that's my least favorite option here, but if you needed to start at ground zero, you can do that. What I was going to show you here is the ability to import. So what that means is if you've got configuration that's out on a big IP that's already discovered in BigIQ, and let's say you know that that HR virtual server or the application services set up for this HR virtual server are kind of your gold standard for how you want to deploy applications in your environment, you can select that virtual server, come over here and say, select the items related to that virtual server, add those into your template, and then import them. And it's going to take the settings of that virtual server and all of its related objects, bring that into BigIQ here, and allow me to now drill down on the settings of that particular application service and set here which pieces of this are editable, which pieces of this are fixed, and create your custom template from your own environment. So if I jump back here,
And that imports 100%, one-to-one mapping on what's configured, nothing that doesn't get migrated.
so if it's an object that BigIQ can manage, it will certainly get pulled in as part of that template. So an example would be right now, BigIQ can't centrally manage an LTM policy outside of connecting the script management piece, or we have a little bit of management of LTM policy for the ASM piece, but it's not something you can really impact your own custom LTM policy. So if you were importing that HR virtual server and it had an LTM policy attached to it, that wouldn't be pulled into the application template as part of that import. So you can see here that my site 10 that I deployed there as my application owner is here and available to me. And it's also, if I, didn't want to do that. If I go back here to my application owner and remember which one of them I was logged in as, I think it was Paul. You'll see that Paul has access to both the Site 40 that he had access to before. Come on, demo gods, we're almost done. So now you can see that we've got the tracking going on and the analytics being reported for that new application that was deployed. So I've got 5 minutes left, according to my friend Jim here. Any questions about things that I glossed over, went too quickly on, things that I didn't cover?
Starbucks cards for questions.
So these templates, one of the things we notice when multiple people are editing, building things, they're inconsistent with naming standards and quality standards. Is there a way that when you build a template as the admin, you can give an example, say, here's the format of how you should name this thing? Sometimes you want underscores rather than white spaces, you want all lowercase, you want people,
So you could certainly control that for the things that are part of the template, but you can't yet control that for the fields that they need to fill in at deployment time. So we have the enforcement around the pieces that we know are going to break a big IP if you try to deploy them there. So some fields allow for underscores and others don't, but we don't yet have the ability to say, enforce this standard for this particular field.
maybe as much as enforce it, but put a little example of what your string should look like.
One thing we do, however, is when you deploy via the app template, we put it in a folder. So at least it is contained, so it's not going to be colliding with something else.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
But, yeah, to Kyle's point.
When you start looking at things and you're maybe prepping through something at some point, and, oh, God, maybe
Right.
what they call this thing, I have no idea what it
Yeah.
is, what it means, you know?
Yep.
Some, you know, you fully qualify it sometimes, you know, but some people don't. but-
Right. Yep. So you can push the certificate from the big IQ as well. You can build that into part of the template. You can make that a selection as part of the template. I think right now that the certificate and key has to exist on big IQ for it to push it out as part of the application. But if that certain key are imported into big IQ at app deployment time, they can either select it or you can make it fixed as part of the template, whichever makes sense for your environment. So right now, the application deployment from, if you're driving it from here, is immediate. We don't have the ability to schedule that. In our sort of object by object deployment flow, we do have the ability to schedule those deployments. So it's a bit of a religious war within the team, actually, of you know, you've got the folks that really want to push us to the true self-service. I can click the button myself and push it all out there. And then you've got other folks that are, you know, recognize that, as I mentioned earlier, people aren't quite ready to give over the keys to the castle, or they need to enforce change windows and things like that. So the one suggestion I would make in that case is potentially, you saw that I had the API calls there to deploy the application. So if you have a ticketing system or something that controls that information, they could file the ticket with the information that's needed, and then that API call can be made. While I'm thinking of it, if anybody is interested in Ansible integration as well, we built some modules for Ansible that can also drive our application templates. I clicked that book icon in the upper right, which is new in 6.0. It gives you a link to the product documentation, the API documentation, and also link to the information for Ansible. So if you're an Ansible shop, that's another way for you to sort of schedule and deploy your applications. I can talk to you later.
Regarding IP pools.
Yep.
All right, can you have multiple IP pools? And if so, is there a limit?
You can have multiple IP pools, and I am not aware of a
I don't think there's
limit.
a limit. So you can have a selection, you can create different pools for, and you can use them for virtual servers, but also when we provision big IPs in the auto scale world, we can use them for self IPs as well.
And management IPs in
And
601.
Yeah. Yay.
Yay. No more DHCP. 601 was out last week. Where have you been? So in 5.4, it's just sort of the bare bones LTM information in the app template, and we don't have this visualization and app-centric view in 5.4. This is 6.0. All right. I'll be around presenting for the next 6 hours, but other than that,
You have to leave
Yeah.
Because you get another session, but I'll hang around if anybody has questions.
All right.